There are moments when the quiet in your life becomes so heavy, it feels like the air around you is thickening. Not in a dramatic way, not in a cinematic, the world is ending way. It's quieter than that. Quieter and somehow darker. It's the kind of silence where you can hear your mind shutting down from the inside, like a house turning off its lights room by room, until only the darkest hallway remains. Most people think pain announces itself loudly, but for the ones who've carried too much for too long, pain becomes something else entirely. Something slow, muted, and strangely polite. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't shout. It just settles. It settles into your chest, your voice, your reactions, your sleep, your days, your entire sense of who you are. And one morning, without meaning to, you realize that your emotional world has flattened into a single dull note. What's frightening isn't the sadness. It's the absence of joy, the absence of anticipation, the absence of that subtle inner spark that once helped you feel alive in your own life. You don't crash, you fade, you don't break, you hollow out, you don't fall apart, you fall inward. People around you might not notice the shift at first. You still show up to work, you still reply to messages with the right words at the right times, you still laugh at the right jokes and nod in the right moments. You become a version of yourself that runs on scripts instead of feelings. A kind of emotional autopilot that looks functional from the outside. But inside, something is wrong, deeply wrong. Your own reactions start to confuse you. You sit on the edge of your bed after a long day and you don't feel tired. You feel disconnected, like your body is here, but the rest of you stayed somewhere else. You catch yourself staring at nothing in particular, not because you're lost in thought, but because thinking itself feels like walking through mud. There's a particular kind of heaviness that forms in people who have been strong for too long. Not heroic strong, not inspirational strong, the quiet kind of strong, the kind that never asked to be strong in the first place, the kind forced onto you by circumstances you didn't choose, losses you didn't want, responsibilities that piled up when no one was looking. And eventually, the mind does something very human, very adaptive, and very misunderstood. It shuts down the parts of you that feel too much. It pulls the plug on joy first, because joy requires energy, presence, openness. Then it dims your curiosity, because curiosity needs safety to explore. And finally, it muffles your entire emotional range, because feeling becomes too expensive. What's left is a muted version of existence, not painful, not dramatic, just flat. You start moving through your days like you're inside thick glass. You can see everything, you can name everything, but nothing reaches you with the full force it once had. Moments that used to matter become blurry around the edges. Life becomes something you watch instead of inhabit. People sometimes call this burnout, or depression, or emotional exhaustion. But these words, as clinical as they are, don't really capture the lived texture of it, the way everything seems to slow down inside your chest while life outside keeps moving at its usual speed. What you're experiencing isn't failure. It isn't weakness. It's a nervous system crouching into survival mode. It is your brain trying, in the only way it currently knows how, to protect you. And yet, even knowing that doesn't make the numbness feel less frightening. The real pain isn't that you feel too much. The real pain is that you've stopped feeling enough, and you don't know how long it will last, or if the real you is still somewhere underneath all of this quiet. Picture this. A small apartment in the Pacific Northwest, winter light leaking through half-closed blinds. The kind of faded gray that doesn't tell you what time it is, just that the day hasn't fully committed to existing. The radiator hums in the background, the low mechanical kind of sound that fills the room without offering any real warmth. There's a person sitting on the edge of their bed, not crying, not panicking, not breaking down, just sitting. Their shoulders are slightly hunched, not from defeat, but from a kind of inward collapse, like the body is trying to fold itself into something smaller, quieter, easier to maintain. They keep rubbing their thumb against their palm, a tiny repetitive motion that doesn't mean anything, but reveals everything. The mind searching for an anchor, any anchor, even a meaningless one. The room around them is still. The air feels heavy in that specific way that only happens when someone's been holding their breath emotionally for years. They glance at a mug on the nightstand, half-finished coffee from the morning. It's cold now. They know they should throw it out. They know they should get up, but the distance between the bed and the trash can feels disproportionate, as if that 2-second action requires a level of internal energy they don't currently have access to. Outside, a car passes by. The sound should pull them back into the world, but it slides past like background noise in a movie they stopped paying attention to. They look at their phone, notifications stacked like layers of expectation. Coworkers asking for updates, friends checking in, bills reminding them they exist. They read the messages without absorbing them, responding with automatic phrases their body has memorized, words without weight. There's a book on the table they've been trying to read, a hobby they once loved. They pick it up. Their eyes move across the page, but nothing sticks. The story doesn't enter. The characters don't land. It's like reading through fog. The shapes are there, but the meaning is gone. They stand up, walk to the living room, and sit on the couch. Not because it's more comfortable, but because their body needed a different kind of stillness, a different angle to the same numbness. They look out the window at the streaks of rain crawling down the glass, and for a moment, it matches something inside them, the slow, quiet descent of something they can't name. There's no dramatic twist, no sudden emotional release. Just a person trying to exist inside a nervous system that has gone offline. And that's the part most people never understand. The collapse isn't always explosive. Sometimes it's so quiet it becomes invisible, even to the person living it. But in that room, in that apartment, in that dim winter light, something important is happening. Not loud, not obvious, but real. A life is pausing, not because it's over, but because the person living it has run out of the internal bandwidth needed to keep pretending everything is fine. The world sees stillness. But the truth is, stillness is often a sign that someone has carried more than their mind was designed to hold. When people describe this kind of emotional dimming, they often look for a psychological explanation, a label, a pattern, a name to hold on to. But the truth is, long before the mind begins to understand what's happening, the body has already made a decision. The nervous system is the first storyteller here. Most of us grew up learning about stress in terms of fight or flight. It's simple, it's intuitive. You either confront the danger or you run from it. But what we rarely talk about is the third response, the one that emerges when neither fighting nor fleeing is possible. Freeze. Not the dramatic kind where you stand motionless in terror, but a deeper biological shutdown, a slowing of emotional and physiological processes meant to help you survive overwhelming situations. In neuroscience, this is tied to what's called the dorsal vagal state, a branch of the nervous system that prioritizes conservation over engagement. In this state, the brain begins turning off the functions that aren't essential for raw survival. Joy is one of the first to go. Curiosity is next. And then, slowly, the entire emotional spectrum dims like a fading signal. It's not that you stop caring, it's that your nervous system stops sending the materials needed to care. Every feeling you've ever had, excitement, sadness, longing, hope, anticipation, is built on chemical signals. Tiny pulses of dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, oxytocin. These aren't happiness chemicals the way pop psychology describes them. They're the building blocks of motivation, connection, attention, meaning. And when life becomes too heavy for too long, the brain tries to protect you by dialing these systems down, not because it wants you numb, but because numbness is, biologically speaking, a shield. For people who've endured chronic emotional overload, through trauma, caretaking, financial strain, loss, or simply years of high-functioning survival, the dopamine system begins to behave like a power grid running on backup energy. It reroutes electricity toward the essentials and dims everything else. This is why activities you used to love no longer light you up. Why conversations feel like tasks. Why decisions feel heavier than they should. Why rest doesn't feel restorative anymore. Why excitement feels foreign. The brain's reward system isn't broken, it's exhausted. And the exhaustion isn't mental weakness, despite what the world often implies. It's a physical state, a neurobiological conservation mode. When your system senses threat, even subtle, prolonged threat, it prioritizes survival over depth. That's why the world feels flatter, why time feels slower, why everything blends together into one muted emotional tone. This shutdown is not a failure of character. It is the body's attempt to make the unbearable bearable. And here's the thing. Once your nervous system has spent enough time in this state, it begins to mistake numbness for safety. It learns that feeling less equals hurting less. And in a way, it's right, in the short term. But numbness, if prolonged, becomes its own form of pain, not the sharp kind, the hollow, weightless kind that makes life feel distant. This isn't you giving up. This is your nervous system trying to protect you, even if the protection comes at a cost. The most overlooked truth about emotional numbness is this. It doesn't appear out of nowhere. It isn't random. It isn't sudden. It's a slow construction, a psychological architecture built piece by piece over years of carrying more than you could process in real time. People imagine numbness as a void, but it's more like a fortress, a place your mind built not to keep the world out, but to keep you intact. When you've been through too much for too long, your inner world starts to reorganize itself around one central goal, reducing emotional exposure. It's not a conscious decision. You don't wake up one day and say, "I'd like to stop feeling." Instead, you adapt in subtle ways. You stop expecting good news. You learn to celebrate quietly. You brace yourself before opening messages. You rehearse conversations before they happen. You shrink your desires down to something you can manage. You keep your hopes small because the fall hurts less from a lower height. This is the psychology of chronic overwhelm. You begin living in a state of anticipatory defense. You're always preparing, always scanning, always adjusting your emotional posture just enough to avoid being blindsided again. The world may not see it. You may not even see it. But internally, you're constantly managing the potential for emotional impact. Over time, this becomes exhausting. And when the emotional cost becomes too high, your mind does something brilliant in its simplicity. It disconnects from the intensity of feeling, not because you're weak, not because you're apathetic, but because your history taught your nervous system that feeling too deeply is dangerous. This leads to what psychologists sometimes call functional dissociation, though the word sounds more dramatic than the experience. It simply means you stay operational while your emotional core retreats. You continue performing your role, at work, in relationships, in day-to-day tasks, but you do it from a distance. You're there, but not fully there, present, but not anchored, alive, but not fully inhabiting your life. And underneath this quiet detachment lies something even more tender, an old, unspoken belief that your feelings are too heavy to be held, by others, or even by yourself. Maybe you grew up in a family where emotions were dismissed as too much. Maybe life forced you into the role of the caretaker long before you were ready. Maybe loss reshaped you in ways you still don't have the language for. Maybe you learned, slowly and painfully, that vulnerability comes with consequences. Whatever the origin, the mind adapts. It builds emotional distance the way the body forms scar tissue, thicker, tougher, less sensitive, necessary for survival, but costly in the long run. And here's the subtle irony. The people who appear the calmest, the most composed, the most in control, are often the ones carrying the deepest internal overload. Not because they're strong, but because they were forced to become strong before they ever felt ready. Numbness is not the absence of emotion. It's the presence of too many emotions, compressed into silence. And that silence is the psyche's final attempt to protect the self that has been stretched beyond its limits. There's a moment, and if you've lived through this kind of numbness long enough, you know exactly what I mean, where you stop asking, "Why do I feel this way?" and begin whispering something far quieter, far more unsettling. "Who am I inside all of this?" Because that's the real cost of emotional shutdown, not the lack of joy, not the exhaustion, not the blunted reactions. It's the erosion of identity. When your world becomes muted, you don't just lose interest, you lose orientation. You can't feel yourself clearly enough to know what you want, what you need, what you believe, what pulls you forward, or what pulls you under. Your emotional compass stops sending signals, and without those signals, even the simplest decisions feel like guesswork. You begin living from memory instead of desire. You return to old habits because they used to matter, not because they matter now. You stay in relationships because they once felt meaningful, not because they currently do. You cling to routines because routine gives you shape, even when nothing else does. And this is the part that rarely gets talked about. Numbness isn't just a psychological state. It's an identity blackout. It's the mind saying, we need to conserve the self, even if that means shutting parts of it down. But here's the quiet truth I wish more people understood. Feeling nothing is still a form of feeling. It is your mind speaking in a different language, a language of absence. Absence means something depleted you. Absence means something overloaded you. Absence means something pushed your emotional system past its capacity. And the numbness you're living in is not random. It's a map that points directly to the places where you once felt deeply. People often assume numbness is simply the absence of strong emotions. But it's more accurately the echo of strong emotions that your mind can no longer afford to process. Think of a speaker that's been blown out, not because the music stopped, but because the volume was too high for too long. Numbness is the distortion left behind. But here's the insight that matters most, the one I've watched unfold in hundreds of people and lived through myself. Numbness doesn't mean you've become less human. It means your humanity has been running without rest. Every system in nature has a shutdown state. Forests after wildfires, rivers during drought, animals during winter. These states aren't weaknesses, they're survival phases. Necessary pauses, natural recalibrations. You are not malfunctioning, you are adapting. You are a nervous system trying to reduce the damage. You are a psyche trying to hold itself together. You are a person trying, quietly, invisibly, to survive your own history. And this reframes the entire experience. You are not broken. You are in a season of conservation, a season in which the emotional ground lies fallow so that one day something can grow again. Your numbness is not the end of your story. It is the winter of it. And winter, by design, is temporary. This isn't hope. This isn't optimism. This is biology. This is how the mind protects a life while waiting for safer conditions to return. And if you sit with this long enough, something interesting starts to reveal itself. The numbness, the fatigue, the emotional distance. They're not isolated symptoms floating in separate corners of your life. They're part of a single, larger architecture, a system quietly built over years of surviving more than you were ever meant to carry alone. Most people think emotional shutdown is a flaw in their personality. But what if it's actually a sophisticated internal algorithm? A way your mind reduces the world into smaller, safer pieces because the full version was too overwhelming at the time. Think about how a computer reacts when too many programs are running at once. The fans get loud, the screen freezes, and eventually the system goes into a low-power mode. Humans have a version of that too, a mental low-power state where the brain trims anything non-essential, joy, curiosity, anticipation, because it's trying to keep you functional at the bare minimum. This is why so many people who have gone through too much share the same set of behaviors, even if their stories are different. You start conserving emotional energy like someone rationing the last bit of electricity in a blackout. You avoid situations that require enthusiasm because you're afraid you'll have none to give. You numb your expectations so you won't feel disappointed. You shrink your world until it fits inside what you can manage. And the strangest part is, it works for a while. That's why so many people don't even realize they're in this state. You still wake up, you still go to work, you still reply to messages when you have to. You still play the character of a functioning adult. But inside, everything is dimmed. The music doesn't hit like it used to. The sky looks flatter than you remember. Conversations feel heavier, like you're dragging them across the floor. Your dreams, once sprawling and alive, now sit in a corner collecting dust. And here's where the expansion really matters. This emotional quietness isn't just about sadness or exhaustion. It also touches identity. When life becomes a series of things you tolerate instead of things you engage with, you start losing sight of who you were before survival mode kicked in. You stop seeing yourself as a person with desires, preferences, opinions, and boundaries, and start seeing yourself as someone who's simply trying to avoid the next emotional hit. Your worldview shifts too. You stop believing good things will last. You suspect that rest will make everything collapse. You interpret neutrality as danger because stability once came right before chaos. You assume people will leave because that's what they've always done. This state can stretch across years, sometimes decades. And because it's quiet, not dramatic, not explosive, people rarely talk about it. They call it being tired or being busy or being disconnected when the truth is far deeper. It's not laziness, it's not lack of willpower, it's not you being unmotivated. It's the psychology of someone who survived more than their emotional system could process, and now lives in the echo of that survival. And recognizing this, really seeing it, is the first step toward loosening its grip. If any part of this feels like your inner landscape, I want you to hear this next part carefully, because recovery from this state isn't about forcing yourself to feel more or pushing your way back into a world that once overwhelmed you. It's about rebuilding the internal circuitry that has been running on emergency mode for too long. The first shift is subtle. You stop trying to go back to who you were, and instead begin creating space for who you're becoming. A version of you that didn't just endure the weight of life, but learned from it, reshaped itself, and is now searching for a new rhythm. For people who have gone through too much, healing rarely begins with big emotional breakthroughs. It starts with small signals, tiny proof that your system is safe enough to open again. Maybe it's noticing that one moment in your day felt slightly less heavy. Maybe it's realizing your mind wandered towards something hopeful for the first time in months. Maybe it's catching yourself laughing for a second longer before the numbness returns. These aren't coincidences. They're neurological openings, your brain testing the waters. This is why gentle practices matter more than grand ones. Instead of fixing your life, try reconnecting with a single sensation. The warmth of a mug in your hands, the weight of your body in a chair, the faint hum of traffic outside your window. Grounding your attention in small sensory experiences helps the brain rediscover what safe presence feels like. And when you don't feel anything at all, that's okay too. Feeling nothing is still a feeling. Numbness is still a form of communication. Your body is saying, I'm preserving energy. You don't need to fight that message, just listen to it with softness. It also helps to replace the question, why am I like this, with something far more honest. What did I survive that made me this way? Because that question honors the truth. It reframes your emotional quietness as an adaptation, not a failure. It keeps you from blaming yourself for wounds you didn't cause, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, your internal system begins to reorganize. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped punishing it for protecting you. There's also power in reconnecting with even one safe person, someone who doesn't demand your energy, someone who isn't trying to fix you, someone who sits with you in the dimness without making it about themselves. Humans regulate through connection, even quiet, wordless connection. Your nervous system learns safety through the presence of another regulated nervous system. This isn't weakness, it's biology. And when connection feels too hard, start with consistency instead. A simple routine, a quiet morning ritual, something predictable enough that your mind can anchor itself to it when everything else feels unsteady. Recovery isn't loud, it isn't dramatic. It won't feel like a movie montage where everything suddenly falls into place. It's more like thawing, slow, uneven, sometimes frustrating. But every thaw begins with a single degree of warmth. And if you're already listening to this, you've already taken the first step. You're noticing. And noticing is the doorway. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you realize your life hasn't been defined solely by what broke you, but also by the ways you kept going despite it. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, just steadily. In the small, uncelebrated ways no one ever sees. And maybe that's the quiet truth underneath everything you've survived. You didn't stay here because things were easy. You stayed because some part of you, buried or bruised or exhausted, still believed there was something worth waiting for, even if you couldn't name it, even if you didn't feel it, even if numbness swallowed every trace of hope. The fact that you're listening to this now means that part of you is still alive. Recovery won't ask you to be stronger. It won't demand that you get over it. It simply invites you to stay curious about your own existence. Just curious enough to notice the faintest shift in your inner weather. Maybe tomorrow won't feel different. Maybe next week won't either. But healing isn't measured in days. It's measured in moments you didn't think you'd live to see. Moments when you breathe a little deeper, stand a little steadier, or look at yourself with a softness you once thought you didn't deserve. If all you can do right now is survive in small, quiet ways, that's enough. And if you ever feel like you've gone numb, remember this. Numbness isn't emptiness. It's evidence of everything you carried for too long without help. It's your mind protecting itself until it's strong enough to return, and when that return finally comes, slowly, quietly, like the first light slipping under a closed door, you'll know.